Hello, Laziali all over the world. Welcome to another episode of Lazio Lounge. We have to talk about the terrible performance, I would say, about Lazio against Milan, a 2-0 defeat. And Darren asked us this morning, will Alasdair McKenzie finally be back? Unfortunately, he is. Hello, Alasdair. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to hear that the crowd are clamoring for my name to get me off the bench. Why isn't this guy playing more? We need him back on the pitch, and here he finally is, back from I was going to say an injury layoff. It wasn't really. It was just a nice little break.
I'm
amazed you didn't open this podcast by talking about how as soon as I come back, Lazio have lost, by the way. I thought that was going to be your intro today.
Well, it is, but you anticipated me, so, I fear this season things are going worse. Before it was you at the Stadio Olimpico and Lazio losing. Now it's only you in Italy makes Lazio lose. So, when you're going back to Scotland?
Yeah, not for a while. Probably not until the winter break, actually. I'm sorry. It's going to be a long year. Oh
my, it's going to be complicated. Talking about long year, Alasdair, in the last 32 years, Lazio playing at San Siro against Milan in the Serie A, only twice this team was able to win. This is something unbelievable. Matches were completely different, but again, I would say the worst performance of this team came against Milan for another year, and it's hard to understand why. I mean, there are so many things that didn't work last night, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I think it's actually relatively easy to understand why. It was a reminder of how this is definitely still a work in progress, and the fact that, hammering pretty poor Empoli and Spezia teams isn't the mark of this team. The mark of this team is how they stand up to tests in big games. And if I'm going to look at this in a slightly optimistic way, I think it's actually probably a good thing for Lazio to get that reminder this early in the season, because it's not just that Lazio are pretty, very, very early in their preparation under Maurizio Sarri, but they're also playing against Stefano Pioli's Milan, which is one of the teams, probably the team with the most kind of embedded game plan in the league by now, other than Gasperini's Atalanta, considering how long he's been at the club, creating that identity, that style of play, and strengthening the squad a lot over the summer. So it wasn't a huge surprise to me, I don't think. I think that we all expected better. We all expected better individual performances from certain players, but the fact that there was one team who seemed to know what they were doing and one team that didn't, I don't think was a huge surprise.
Yeah, I agree with you, unfortunately. The fact that Pioli is the manager of Milan and AC Milan is the only big team with Atalanta that didn't change the manager, this provided them an advantage, even though Atalanta is struggling. So it's not always the same thing. But without Ibrahimovic, without Giroud, I was thinking that maybe AC Milan could struggle. Instead, they play great football and they dominated the match. This was probably the biggest surprise, because with Sarri, I was expecting Lazio keeping the ball possession, which didn't happen for all the match. We struggled, especially to stop Leao. His speed has always, even in the past years, put Lazio defense in big trouble, and this didn't change with Maurizio Sarri. So to our listener asking if this is due to Sarriball, people learning Sarriball, I think it is. At the same time, Alasdair, I think watching the other matches, the other two matches Lazio played this season, this is a step back compared to performance against Empoli, against Spezia, right?
Yeah, of course it is. And I think, again, you have to take into consideration the fact that, 12 teams in Serie A changed coaches over the summer. That's a lot of teams. Two of those were Empoli and Spezia, who lost very promising young coaches in Dionisi and Italiano and replaced them with, in my opinion, not great coaches in Andrea Soli and Thiago Motta. So those tasks. You're up against teams that, like Lazio, are trying to, start a new era, but with vastly inferior resources. And jumping from that to playing a Milan team which has strengthened a lot, like I said, which knows exactly what it's doing, and which had the added bonus of being at home with, the story of Ibrahimovic returning from injury, and like we just saw with Ronaldo's Manchester United debut, you should never underestimate narrative in football, because it's amazing how often that actually results in something happening. So the signs were there. The signs were there. For me, the most worrying thing was really what Sarri said after the game about the fact that this wasn't the game plan that Lazio prepared. The fact that Lazio had been training all week to do something completely different to what they did on the pitch. He wanted them to apply pressure high up the pitch, to not be kind of sitting deep and waiting. And he sounded a bit concerned about the fact that, well, this is actually a bigger task than I thought it would be, to make this transition from what these guys are used to what I want them to do. And so for me, that was, again, quite alarming that he was as surprised as he was that the team, for whatever reason, wasn't really responding to that.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is that I cannot blame Reina for this defeat. So that's something that really concerned me. But apart from that, one thing I noticed, Alasdair, is that Pioli prepared very well this match, and Milinkovic Savic and Luis Alberto were marked for 95 minutes, and Kessie followed Milinkovic Savic even to the toilet. And same thing we can say about Luis Alberto. And both players didn't move to find the space to get the ball. They were, I would say, lazy, not trying to move and be free. And with those players marked for all the match, Lazio didn't create nothing. And this happened already with Atalanta. We know that Gasperini, when the team is defending, he goes man-to-man, even in midfield. And Lazio always struggled to Gasperini. So I thought Pioli copied that. And I'm quite surprised that quality players like Luis Alberto and Milinkovic Savic were lazy not to trying to find a solution for this.
Yeah, I think that was probably the greatest disappointment for everyone, was that the midfield was where the game was lost, because we do see the midfield as being the strongest part of the team, and those are the players, Milinkovic and Alberto, that you're expecting to bring some life to things as it goes along. But again, I think they just got the game plan worked against them. Milan executed it perfectly, really, and there was no space for them to operate. I mean, I don't know. I really don't think it's time to be extremely concerned, extremely negative about this performance, because I said the very start of the season, I have a feeling that the entire season's not going to be brilliant, actually, and it is going to take a while to get things going, and we shouldn't panic as soon as there's a bad result. But yeah, working out a way, I think we got one question about, has this given other teams a kind of blueprint of how you beat Lazio? If you mark those two players out of the game, you shut them down. I think, teams will try and do that, but you need very quality squad and players in order to be able to shut down players of the level of Alberto Milinkovic, and not many teams in the league are going to be capable of doing that. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be something that, Cagliari next weekend are going to be able to go and replicate just because Milan did it.
No, I agree with you, but on that point, we already mentioned Luis Alberto and Milinkovic Savic, but I think this year this team has so much quality. I was hoping that Felipe Anderson, for example, would step up and, take more ball possession and help Lazio solve the problem. I thought Pedro did it. Pedro moved centrally to get the ball more often and demanded Milinkovic Savic to take his position, so that, Kessie moving to the side will free Pedro. I was hoping Felipe Anderson would have done the same, which didn't happen. So I blame definitely Milinkovic Savic and Luis Alberto, but it's not that the other players did much better, right? And we have, as usual, Alasdair, a lot of questions about Lucas Leiva. People saying he's not fit for Maurizio Sarri football. Is Lucas Leiva too old, etc.? I agree. I understand all these questions and all these doubts on Lucas Leiva, but I don't believe we lost yesterday or Lazio played badly because of Lucas Leiva, right?
No, I mean, it was quite interesting reading the player ratings and the papers this morning, because that everyone trying desperately to find who was the best Lazio player yesterday, and most seemed to opt for Pedro, but there weren't many standout performances. It was more competitive to say who was the worst player on the pitch, and Lucas, to be fair, wasn't picked out as one of them. I think the biggest concern for me is that I read going into this game that in the opening 2 weeks of the season, Lazio have done more running than any other team in Serie A. Now, that is going to be something that weighs on them as the season goes on. They went from 2 weeks of that into an international break that has been expanded. So all the guys who are away, like Milinkovic-Savic, had 3 international games in the space of a week. Now they're coming back to a situation where the Europa League is starting and we've got 3 games a week starting. And if Lazio are going to have a high-intensity style of play, that's going to be an awful lot of running, especially for that midfield. And that is going to put tons of pressure on a player of Lucas's age. So it's not really, I don't think he can't play in Sarri's team. I definitely disagree with that notion, but I just think he's going to have to be very, very careful in the way that he manages him. And it's kind of problematic, as we've said all along, that there isn't a natural replacement, a natural kind of successor ready to take on that role in his place. I was just going to ask what you thought of Tomáš Basic and the little we saw of him, and if you think he can do anything in that regard.
Well, this is what I wanted to talk about. I mean, I think Basic is a quality player, but Maurizio Sarri, 2 weeks ago, when Lazio signed this player, said he's not fit to play in Lucas Leiva's position. And I think that was the glaring hole Lazio had in midfield. I understand that you want to get a quality player for cheap, but I think the biggest issue there was a replacement for Lucas Leiva. So I don't know if Sarri will change his mind and maybe give a chance to Basic to play there or not, but I think that should have been the top priority, right? Or Maurizio Sarri is convinced that Escalante or Cataldi can play there and play at a good level, or otherwise, as you were saying, this is a concern. Lazio will run a lot. We never, in the years as a Lazio player, Leiva didn't play a full season, and especially with Simone Inzaghi last year, he hardly played 90 minutes in a football match. He was very often the first sub, right? So I don't know. Can he play 90 minutes this year for every single match? I don't see it happen. So we're missing something. Or Sarri is convinced that Escalante will play and will play well, or we're going to have an issue there.
Yeah, I think we are going to have an issue there. I mean, the thing I find really bizarre about this, I don't know about you, is that so far in Sarri's coaching career, since he reached Napoli, after he left Napoli and then went to Juventus, the Jorginho role was always the biggest talking point, right? I mean, when he went to Chelsea, the one thing he said was, I'm bringing Jorginho with me. Yeah. And he was desperate to get Jorginho. Man City were about to sign Jorginho, and then Chelsea swooped in and they kind of ruined their relationship and all that. And that was essential for Sarri, was, if I'm going to bring my style of play here, I need this player. Then he goes to Juventus, and as I recall, pretty much that whole summer was about, right, who's going to play in the Jorginho role? And eventually they decided it was Pjanic could take on that responsibility, and there was a lot of talk about how many passes he wanted to complete in every game and how he was going to adapt to this role, and yet he never really did that very successfully. But it was something that was talked about all the time, was Pjanic playing in the Jorginho role. And then, there's this break since he's left Juventus. He comes to Lazio, and it's not really been something that has been the main talking point. The main talking point has understandably been this transition from 3-5-2 to 4-3-3, the fact that Lazio had no wingers, the fact that Lazio had no fullbacks, and there was so much to do. But at the very center of all of that is clearly the Jorginho role needing filled if you're going to play Sarriball. And I'm kind of surprised that Sarri's not talked about it more, that he's not raised it more, because it's clear that a player of Lucas's age isn't gonna play 3 games a week at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's surprising, honestly. I believe that for him, Lazio had so many things to do this summer that he said, okay, I prefer to get my wingers than the Jorginho player. But I'm not convinced that's the right decision. Again, I believe that Sarri is not stupid, so maybe he knows something that we are not aware of. Maybe he's seeing, I don't know, Cataldi in training and said, wow, he's playing great. He can really play there, even though against La Spezia, he came in a different position. So I don't know, Alasdair. Let's not forget that Thursday, there's Galatasaray-Lazio, very important match. Lazio has a tough group in Europa League. We need to get points. There's Cagliari, then on Sunday. I don't think Leva is going to play, or better, I don't think Leva is going to start both matches. So we're going to see what's happening. Who's going to start instead of Leva?
What do you... I don't know about you. Do you share my fear that this Europa League campaign is going to be a bit like the one a couple of years ago, where Lazio don't really have a strong enough B team to be getting through a group that strong, but at the same time they kind of have to be rotating the team for these midweek games? When we were in that group with Cluj and Celtic a few years ago, and it was a complete disaster because when Inzaghi rotated, the team's quality dropped so much. And I have to say, I look at it now and I can't help but fear the same thing. I mean, Galatasaray, Lokomotiv, and Marseille is a tough group to be playing a second string team in.
My concern, Alasdair, is that he's not going to rotate. I think he's going to do very little. Maybe Basic is going to start instead of Luis Alberto Milinkovic-Savic. Maybe Murici or Raul Moro could start. But I think of the 11 players, probably he's going to change a couple, plus I hope Strakosha. So my concern is pretty much the opposite. I fear that Sarri is going to start the best team available in Europe League as well. So we're going to arrive in February with a team knackered because all the Ciro Immobile will have played, 20 matches already in January, and same thing Leva. So that's my biggest concern. I agree with you that Lazio, if Lazio play the subs in Europe League, we're going to struggle, especially in some position, because, who's going to play instead of Leva? Who's going to play instead of Acerbi? That's who's going to play instead of Hisai? Because we don't have a left back, right? Or Rado's going to switch there. I don't know. So there are a lot of question marks that probably we're going to have an answer on Thursday. Maybe. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the Hisai one in the season preview, I think, and it's been kind of overlooked because there's so many other questions in the squad. But the fact that he's not a natural left back and he's our first choice left back and there's no other left backs in the squad.
He's the only choice left back.
I mean, I guess Marisic, will probably end up being moved over there again. Or Stefan Radu will move out there again. But again, asking a lot of a player of his age and injury record to be changing roles like that. But yeah, there's a lot of questions to be answered. I do think Europa League's probably going to be more interesting a watch this time around than it was a couple of years ago, just because there are more new faces in the team. There are more young faces in the team. I think I'm not sure I agree with you on the rotation thing. I think that we're more likely to see some more interesting selections in these midweek games than we were under Inzaghi, when we were all desperate to see some sort of interesting selection or opportunities given, and those opportunities were only ever given to players like Marco Parolo or Cataldi, or guys you kind of know exactly what they're going to do. Whereas now we've got Romero, we've got Moro, we've got Basic, Zaccagni, and I'm not expecting him to just throw out an entirely new team, but I think we do have more opportunities under Sarri to see the more interesting players have some time.
It would be unbelievable if Raul Moro starts, but it could be exciting. That would be a nice move. But talking about Milan and Lazio again, were you surprised that Luis Alberto and Milinkovic-Savic wasn't subbed at the beginning of the second half? Because I thought they were playing terrible, and still Sarri gave them a chance to keep playing.
I mean, from what Sarri said after the game, I feel like he was almost surprised by the fact that they weren't doing what he was telling them to do. So I do kind of wonder if he was kind of waiting for them to, especially after half time, maybe having spoken to them, waiting for them to just snap into gear and start playing in the way that they'd just been preparing, the way they'd been training, and apply pressure up the pitch and up the tempo, put more pressure on Milan, but they weren't doing that. I felt like as the second half started and went on, Milan were quite happy to let Lazio have the ball at that stage, and Alberto would come deeper, and there would just be the same old like sideways passes and not really getting anywhere. So I don't know. I mean, he did also say after the game, I think he was asked about, oh, why didn't you make this change, or would this player made a difference? And he said, you know, I could have made, if I was going to change, I would have had to change the entire team. But I think it's ridiculous to think that we could change, you know, a couple of players and the entire performance would change, which he's probably right about. But at the same time, if a player's having a bad day and they're not getting into it, then you probably should try something else.
Yeah, especially because now you have some option there. So, you know, you could have give Basic more time, because playing a couple of minutes when the match is over is pretty much useless, right? So you had an option there. Maybe doesn't believe Basic is still ready. So this makes me think, well, will he be ready for Thursday? I don't know. But yeah, I was hoping for some substitution earlier. What do you think about the red card? Was Bakayoko a red card there on Acerbi, or do you agree it was a yellow card? Because this has been part of the discussion on the social medias.
I'm impressed, Vittorio. We're quite a few minutes into this podcast before you brought up the referee. You are very restrained today. I probably would call it like an orange card in that it's one of those where I don't think it was so ridiculous a challenge that it was without argument a definite red, but I think it could have easily been a red card. It kind of is up to the interpretation. I do feel like if I think it was Mazzoleni had asked Keithy to go and have a look at it, then I think in slow motion it looked pretty bad, and he may well have shown him a red card. I can understand why in real time he didn't. So yeah, it's one of those kind of 50-50s for me. It's frustrating because you feel like it could easily have gone Lazio's way, but given the referee's record in Lazio matches, it was unlikely.
Yeah. Talking about the red card, what do you think about Acerbi? Because a lot of Lazio fans complain about Acerbi, especially on the second goal, the Ibra goal. So do you think he's struggling with Maurizio Sarri?
I think he's struggling a bit in general. I remember in the season preview, one of the questions we got asked was about who we expect might decline more this season, and he was my pick because I don't think he had a great season last year either. And it's unfortunate. I think he still has to be a first choice, but I don't know. He just seems a bit sluggish at the moment. He seems a bit slow to things. They're a bit of an odd partnership, Acerbi and Felipe, because they're such different kinds of players in many ways. And Felipe he made a couple of absolutely great challenges yesterday, but at the same time, the two of them just seem to be a bit confused, a bit out of position. And I think that back four needs work. You know, it's a reminder to everyone who was screaming for a back four over the last 5 years all the time that it's not that easy to make that defensive transition. And I think what you don't want with a player like Acerbi is for him to become isolated. And I think him and Felipe were both left quite isolated yesterday at times.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Acerbi has to improve. And the fact that he went to the national team didn't help. He didn't have time to recover. He didn't have time to train and prepare with the others. You know, I'm quite surprised that Radu didn't play. And I think he should have more time now going further because, you know, Acerbi is not playing great football. Luis Felipe is probably the most important defender we have at the moment. So maybe trying with Stefan Radu against Cagliari or against Galatasaray could be an option because Radu have played both left back and central defender in a 4-man defense. So maybe he's in a better position than Acerbi right now.
I did like seeing Luis Felipe in the kind of Bonucci role, though, where they were kind of using him as a second playmaker almost, where he was pinging. There's that Brazilian connection where he was pinging those big cross-field passes out to Anderson. And Anderson's first touch is so good that he was managing to make that transition from defense to attack really quickly. I mean, there was... and I thought my my DAZN, because it's been a disaster. We don't need to talk about it for overseas views, but I thought it had like jumped back or something, because there was this move where it was Felipe to Anderson into Immobile, and Immobile messes up the pass. And then 2 minutes later, exactly the same thing happened again. And I thought that DAZN had messed up and it somehow jumped backwards, but it was the same move. And I thought things like that, little moves like that is encouraging. It didn't work on those occasions, but that is a case of making the most of the players you've got, because Felipe's got that passing range. Anderson's got that first touch to be able to set up the chances, and it wasn't Chiro's day yesterday, so he didn't do anything with it. But yeah, there's things like that. I do, it's not all doom and gloom and disaster. There are signs of work in progress. It's not just that it was all complete disaster.
No, and I think we saw players a little bit too nervous yesterday, and that for me was a clear signal that they were trying to do something different, but it simply didn't work out for them. So again, I said this match was coming too early for Lazio, and probably I was right. Lazio players need time to adapt, to move from a Simone Inzaghi football to a Sarri football. And unfortunately, this match was early. I think the derby comes very early, and that's a concerning point for me. I don't think Lazio will be 100% ready for the derby. And, losing a derby is never good.
No, absolutely not. And Roma are a different team this year. I mean, well, we can talk about that later on. I mean, the only thing I want to add about the Milan game was how frustrating and depressing it was that it's taken 3 games into the season for a group of Lazio fans to think it's acceptable to be doing racist chanting towards a Milan player. And now Bakayoko has made his feelings clear quite rightly on social media. Milan are considering a complaint to Fiji. I hope they do. I hope Fiji act, and I hope that forces Lazio into actually taking some action and trying to identify the guys who are doing these kind of things and getting rid of them, not letting them attend matches anymore. I mean, how many times do we have to say it? But, it's 3 weeks into the season, we're all delighted to have football back, and we're already talking about this stuff. It's so depressing.
Yeah, we were all happy to have fans back at the stadium, but if these people behave like that, then...
Not those guys.
No, they're not welcome. I hope really that Lazio does something, because as we said multiple times on this podcast, they are damaging Lazio and Lazio fans around the world. So this is why we are so annoyed about that. And we hope they're finally going to do something, finally going to act and do something. Because again, it's not that difficult. We are in 2021. You have camera all over the world, every place. So how it's not possible that they don't get identified? It's beyond me. I really don't understand. There's obviously someone hiding them, because it should be so easy to identify them. So this is very unfortunate, and we hope Lazio finally act and do something. Said this, Alasdair, I think we can wrap it up here and hope that this was just a little issue in the new Sarri era. Unfortunately, I think this defeat came early, so Lazio players will understand that there's still a lot of job to do, still a lot of work to do. The season is long. I mean, Juventus is just at 1 point after 3 matches. So, we are in a better position than Juventus. So this should be cheering up.
Getting relegated.
So,
heard it here first.
I don't think it's happened, but Juventus is a bad team, I think. It's even worse than last year. But, Thursday there's Galatasaray, then there's Cagliari coming up. A lot of important matches for Lazio. we're going to have a special podcast coming up, Behind Enemy Lines, coming before Galatasaray. Sean McIntosh and Steve Moore is going to talk about Galatasaray. So keep an eye on it. And remember, as always, you can find her on our social media and on all places where you follow your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon, wherever you're following our podcast, you can find Lazio Lounge. So thank you very much, Alasdair, for joining me. We're going to talk soon, probably after Europe League match.
Cheers.